Why did Patsy call the police? Well, John and Patsy needed help finding their daughter, and the police can do an investigation, fingerprint around the house, question neighbors, and ultimately would be the best hope of finding JonBenet Ramsey. But what if John had killed JonBenet and Patsy had helped cover it up? Why would Patsy call the police? Let me set the stage for you. These are Patsy's words from her book, The Death of Innocence. There's a note downstairs. I can barely speak. Someone has taken JonBenet. I feel the blood rushing from my head. For a moment, I feel like fainting. She's gone, I cry. JonBenet is gone. My stomach wrenches. John tears down the stairs. He seems to be shouting, but nothing makes any sense. Burke, John yells. What about Burke? Both of us race to Burke's room at the far end of the second floor and find him apparently still asleep. Best not to arouse him until we figure out what's happening here, I think. He's better off asleep for now. I step into the hall. John runs down the main stairs and into the back hallway. I grasp my stomach and run after him. By the time I get to him, he is down on his hands and knees staring at the sheets of paper spread out on the floor in front of him. He is examining the ransom note under the ceiling lights of the back hall. What shall we do? I stammer. He shouts, call the police. Are you sure? Yes, call them. Standing next to the wall phone, I instantly dial 911. Before I go into answering the question, why did Patsy call the police? I want to bring to your attention the different accounts that Patsy Ramsey gave to the police during her first police interview. Now, Patsy's first answer to the question, because the way the police do the interviews, they ask the question, and then they ask some more questions, and then they backtrack and ask the question again to see if the person gives the same answer again. And they do this tactic over and over to try to find out the truth or see if the person's lying. So the first time Patsy answered this question, she said that John met her on the second floor. She told him about the ransom note, and she asked him, what should I do? And he said, call the police. Then he said something about, what about Burke? And he went and checked on Burke, and Patsy went downstairs to the first floor to call 911, and then John came down and read the note on the floor. Then the police asked Patsy who moved the note from the stairs to the floor, and Patsy said, I think he did. I don't remember exactly, but I mean it was just, I was just nuts. Then the police asked, when did you go check on Burke? I think John ran and checked on him when I was up there. It just all happened so fast. I said, oh my God, what about Burke? And I think he ran in and checked him while I was running back downstairs or something. But I remember John, I think John ran and checked on him, and he told me he was okay or whatever. Was Burke still in the same bed? He hadn't moved beds or anything like that? I don't know. I didn't go in there and look. Okay, John talked about with all the commotion and you guys yelling and stuff. Did that wake up Burke at all? No, it didn't. Now, have you noticed all the things that Patsy has said wrong? In their book, she says that John told her to call the police downstairs when he was reading the note. and that John was down there first. But during the police interviews, Patsy was saying that she was down there first. And she said that she didn't check on Burke. John checked on Burke. And to emphasize that point, she said she didn't know if Burke was still in bed. Now listen to this exchange that Patsy had with the police. I called for John, and then, momentarily he went downstairs to the kitchen to call. Was that when John was checking Burke? I believe so. Everything just happened so fast, right there. I don't remember. I just remember at one point, we were saying, what about Burke? And John ran in and checked Burke. And I ran back downstairs, and then suddenly he was downstairs. And it was just so fast, everything. Obviously, Burke was okay. Right. But at some point, John came back down and caught up with you. You don't recall if it was during the 911 call or after? Well, I remember myself being on the phone, and he was crouched down on the floor there in the hallway looking and reading at the note. Okay, and I was on the phone, so I don't know what happened first. So did they make up the whole story? There was no surprise finding the ransom note and running upstairs and finding JonBenet missing, and Patsy asking John, what should we do? And John saying, call the police. The reason that Patsy called 911 was because at 7 a.m., Mike Archuleta would be waiting at Jeffco Airport for them. And so they would have to tell Mike some kind of story, either that JonBenet had been kidnapped or that she was sick and they couldn't go. And then at 8 a.m. or so, Burke would have been getting out of bed, and they would have had to tell him some story of what happened to JonBenet. Would they tell him the truth, or would they make up some lie? And then at 10 a.m., John and Patsy's time, Melinda and Stuart Long and John Andrew would have landed in Minneapolis and been stranded there. And so they would have had to tell them some kind of story of what happened. And they might have said, well, have you called the police? What are the police doing? So ultimately, they would have been forced to call the police at some point that morning. And if they didn't, John and Patsy would have been forced to pretend for hours and hours on the 26th about what happened. So what I have realized is the parent that did not kill JonBenet wasn't going to continue on with this charade. She would have wanted to call the police and be over with it. So why am I saying that Patsy was innocent? Because JonBenet was wrapped in a blanket and put in the wine cellar. Would John do that? Did John do that? No. Because he was smart enough to know that if he did this, the police would know that they were guilty. Patsy did this because she was distraught and totally upset about JonBenet dying. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and this is what I believe. That John Ramsey was molesting JonBenet. He had some to drink that night, and he ended up killing JonBenet. And Patsy felt a little bit responsible for this, and Patsy covered up for John Ramsey, but she would only go so far. So that's why she called 911 that morning. because she wasn't going to continue on with John's lies, and she wanted this over. And I'll see you next weekend.